Debbie. Debbie had a CBD treat earlier and she's a little. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Did you hear my neck crack? My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you are in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, turn on all of the notifications, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. Today's episode of Crue Trime has been recommended by a few viewers, including Miss Reba and Shen Holder. So thank you, friends. I appreciate you. This one is actually a little bit more recent and is absolutely gruesome and disturbing. So perfect for us creeps. This is the story of Brian Cohee. Also, I don't really talk about the makeup that I'm using as I'm using it. So if you want to know what it is, just look down in the description box because everything is linked just for you. On February 28th, 2021, the Grand Junction, Colorado Emergency Services responded to the Blue Heron boat ramp to help 19-year-old Brian Cohee Jr., whose car was floating out in the middle of the Colorado River. Brian's Ford 500 had slid backwards into the river and was currently bobbing in the harbor. So sometimes like trucks or boat trailers would, get maybe too far into the water and get stuck when trying to load or unload a boat, but this was just like a regular car, so that's weird.
How do we call a tow for that?
I don't know, because he'd have to get in the friggin' water.
Yeah.
It was the middle of the night, like 1 a.m. So while a tow truck might be able to get the car out, the police were having a hard time getting anybody to respond at that late of an hour. When the police arrived and spoke to Brian and his parents, Terry and Brian Sr., Brian Jr. had explained that he had come up to the riverbank to think. He backed his car up so he was facing away from the river, and when he started the car again to leave, he put it in drive, but it just kept sliding backwards into the water. Brian wasn't a very experienced driver either, so he had put it into a lower gear and tried again, but the car was just in the mud. Luckily for Brian, the water wasn't very deep at the riverbank, so he was able to climb out of his car window and get to the shore very safely. But once he was out of the car, his cell phone was dead, and it was very cold being February in Colorado. So Brian said he started walking down the road, and he waited about 5 minutes until a friendly citizen passerby named Durwood Piper stopped to help him. Durwood loaned Brian his cell phone so he could call his parents, and he also offered to let him sit inside his warm vehicle while he waited for help. Durwood would later tell the police that Brian paced a lot and talked about how his car was gone. And to be fair, any 19-year-old who was looking at their car in the middle of the river might be pretty stressed. But we would later learn that Brian had a secret. He had actually come to the Colorado River to dispose of a body, and he was waiting for the police to essentially show up and bust him. Brian's parents were divorced, but apparently they were very committed and engaged co-parents, and they both showed up for Brian anytime he needed it. So when the officers arrived, they talked to Brian while he sat in the warmth of his dad's truck, and his mom was pacing around and explaining that they had made Brian wait until he was 18 to get his driver's license because they didn't want him doing any of the stupid things that 17-year-old drivers do or 16-year-old drivers do. But then she laughed and said, "I guess there's no age limit on stupid."
I said what I said.
So while they were all waiting for this tow truck to show up, Brian was free to leave, so his dad gave him a ride to his mom's house. Obviously, Brian at this time still lived at home with his mom. So when the car was finally pulled out of the water, the officer noticed something red, presumably blood, on the bumper behind the license plate. Red flags.
Looks like blood.
Blood?
Yeah. I don't know if did your son hurt himself on his way out at all? He might have. He just didn't know it. I don't know. That's why I'm asking. It's a good question.
Maybe when he was trying to get out of the car or, in a panic. Well, Terry called Brian and asked about that, and he said, no, no injuries at all. Anyway, so with no other injuries or clear indications of foul play or accident, the report was closed for the night and the car was towed to Brian's dad's house. So the next morning, Brian Sr. was cleaning out the car because he was going to have it taken to the salvage yard. It was totally ruined. Water, all that, right? On the passenger side, beside the seat, he found a brown wallet that clearly did not belong to his son. Brian Sr. ran a life jacket program at the boat docks, so he was able to check the ID and to try to return it to the owner. Well, the identification card belonged to a 69-year-old man named Walter Barnes. Hi, Editing Sarah here. For some reason, I call this man named Warren Walter for the entirety of the video, so I apologize. Sincerely, my mistake. His name is Warren, not Walter. Also in the wallet was a work card for a company called People Ready. It's a company that kind of helps out unhoused people. So Brian Sr. contacted them and asked if they had ever heard of this Walter Barnes. And they had heard of him. He had been working with their company for like 4 years. And they explained to Brian Sr. that Walter hadn't come in to work that morning, and that had never happened in the 4 years that they'd known him. And they had actually reported him missing. Well, Brian Sr. gave the program his contact info and told them when they found Walter to let him know that he'd found his wallet and was holding on to it for him. When Brian Sr. was able to speak to his son next, he asked, what's this wallet all about? Who's Walter Barnes? Well, Brian said that he had found the wallet by the river earlier, but with all the excitement, he hadn't mentioned it. So Walter Barnes was actually well known in the local area of Grand Junction, near Monique's boutique. He was known as the reading man. So Walter would do his morning work at People Ready, and then Monique Lanati, the owner of Monique's boutique, she would set out a chair for Walter in front of her store so he could spend his days reading books. Monique knew Walter to be incredibly kind, and he always had a book. He was always reading. So when Walter didn't show up one morning, March 1st, 2021, Monique got worried and reported Walter missing, but the officers assured both Monique and the manager at People Ready that they would start looking at homeless camps. So to summarize, People Ready hadn't seen Walter as they normally would, and then Monique didn't see him, which was also very, very, very strange. But before the Grand Junction police could get started looking for him, they received a 911 call the very same day from a very panicked Terry Cohee. Terry actually ran a daycare for young kids aged 2 to 5 Monday through Friday out of her home. But the day that Brian Sr. found that wallet in the car, also they had seen blood on the car, Terry was worried. So she decided to look around in Brian Jr.'s bedroom. Hold on to your butts. Inside Brian's closet was a blue plastic tote bin, and inside was a white plastic trash bag. Terry would later say that when she lifted up that trash bag, it felt like wet, and she thought that it actually had like maggots in it, so she took it to the kitchen, like to the sink.
I found something in my son's closet wrapped in a plastic bag.
Okay, what was it?
Terry realized that the item actually had been double bagged, so when she ripped through one bag and then into the next, the contents of the bag were a human head.
It's a what?
I think it's a human head.
Now remember, there's a bunch of little kids inside Terry's house, and she's like, oh my God. So she thought very quickly to call the parents of these kids to come get their children due to her own family emergency, got the kids out of the house. She also called Brian Sr. and told him that he needed to come over right now. There was also a second plastic bag in that blue tote, but she had not opened it. Earlier that day, Brian Jr. had actually borrowed his younger brother Alex's car to go visit his longtime friend, Kylan. Brian Jr. had been friends with Kylan since they were like in elementary school, but there was nothing romantic going on. The night before this, after he had gotten home from the river incident, he had texted Kylan to tell her what happened to his car and that it was totally ruined. And he told her kind of the same story that he told his parents the night before about driving the car out to the river just to think and then accidentally sliding down into the river. He told her he had to do something quick to make sure he didn't die of hypothermia. Kylan would later say that he was acting perfectly normal, nothing out of the ordinary. So back at Brian's mom's house, Terry was on her cell phone in the backyard talking to the 911 operator. I guess Brian was already back home from visiting Kylan, and she was in the backyard on her phone so that Brian wouldn't hear her talking and know what was going on. Well, when the Grand Junction police showed up, Brian was out in the front yard talking with his brother and dad, and the police said that they were there because of something that Brian's mother had found in his closet.
Stuff they may have found in your room?
Yeah, I believe so.
And what would it be?
A human head and hands.
What? The officer escorted the very cooperative Brian to the waiting squad car, and then they drove him to the police station so that they could talk to him. One officer stayed behind to secure the scene, and they were able to verify that there really was a human head in this bag in the Cohee's kitchen sink. I'm not really sure how you could mix that up, but okay. Brian was interrogated by the police for 2 hours, and he totally confessed every detail about the murder.
I murdered someone.
Okay.
He told them that he had always wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone, and he had always wanted to cut someone up.
I'm sorry, what?
He told them that the night that he killed this person, it was a full moon, so he could see pretty well what he was doing and where he was going. He drove around sort of aimlessly, and then he went under a bridge near the police station. Near the police station! Brian told them that he saw a lump person and got excited. You guys, he's like smiling in the interview.
Is it okay if I do a demonstration? Oh, yeah.
Brian said that he parked his car and walked over to this lump and realized it was a homeless person wrapped up in like a canvas sleeping bag. So he went back to his car to get ready. So Brian was already wearing like a one-piece blue like coveralls, like jumpsuit. So he put on a Michael Myers mask to complete the look. A Michael Myers mask. Stop it. Brian told the police that he put on 3 pairs of gloves because he said that fingerprints can sometimes come through latex gloves. Okay, Brian. He walked back over to the lump and he pulled back the blanket that was covering him and started stabbing at his neck with a large knife. Now, during the attack, obviously, Walter woke up and started yelling and asking, why? And Brian said,
And I said, I've been wanting to do this for a long fucking time.
Then he growled as he continued to attack Walter until he went limp. So with Walter finally still, Brian raised his shirt, Walter's shirt, and cut open his side, spilling out his innards.
They're really pink. Sorry, that was morbid.
Well, Walter was mostly decapitated from the attack, and Brian finished it off. He then cut off his hands, presumably for fingerprint reasons. Then Brian put the head inside of a pizza box. How does a head fit in a pizza box? I mean, you just kind of like crumple it up over it? Am I thinking about this too much? Yes.
What's in the fucking box?
Brian put the severed hands inside a plastic bag, like zip top baggies. He continued cutting, attempting to dismember this body, but he didn't get very far until he just took the head and hands and put it in the trunk of his car and left to go home. Even after he put the head and hands in his closet, Brian couldn't sleep. He said he was worried that one of the gloves had ripped and some evidence of him might be on Walter's remains. So, you guessed it, he went back for the body. He put the body in the trunk of his car and then drove to the Blue Heron boat ramp to try and get rid of the evidence. He backed that Ford 500 up to the riverbank, opened the trunk to toss Walter's body into the river, but when he got into his car to leave, it started sliding down the riverbank.
I'm panicking a bit at this point. I'm going to be like, this is what I'm going to be remembered for, dying of Czechoslovakia and a botched attempt at hiding a body, and I'm just like, fuck.
And that brings us back to the beginning of the story. Okay, so Brian is in this police interview, and he tells them that he might as well talk to him,
Because, Murray going to jail for this 15 years, probably.
It's kind of conservative estimate, don't you think? He also asked the police that if people that have committed crimes like that get to stay in jail, or do they get transferred? Baby, you're going to big boy prison. Okay? Brian would later say that he knew the police would not give priority to high-risk victims, like unhoused people and sex workers, for example. He said that he chose his victim because he didn't think that they would be missed and that he'd get away with it. And honestly, if it wasn't for this car bobbing around in the river, he might have. Brian told the police that he was only going to keep the head and hands for like a couple days, until they started to smell and he would have to get rid of them. So I've watched this body cam footage from like when the police first show up and the car is just like sitting in the river. Brian is so calm. You can't tell at all that there's also like body parts with his car. But also, Brian might have been thinking that all of the evidence was being washed away by the water coming into the car. So maybe like a happy accident?
Instantly, I was like, yeah, no.
But also, he never thought to go scrub down the car once it was recovered and in his dad's backyard. But once the car was examined for evidence and all of that, Walter's blood was found on the passenger door handle, the trunk, and the bumper. So what in fresh hell would cause a 19-year-old person to do such a thing, you might be wondering. Were there red flags, you ask? You betcha. Back in 2019, Brian had fashioned like an Indiana Jones whip from masking tape for a school project, and while it was good work, and nothing was weird about that, when he used it to whip a classmate at a bus stop, and this classmate was someone that was developmentally delayed. Not cool, Brian. Also, one of Brian's teachers, like a history teacher, found a notebook of Brian's that had all of Brian's favorite kills written inside of it. He was obsessed with serial killers like Ted Bundy and Ed Kemper and the Columbine shooters. He wrote in detail in this book that he wanted to take a family hostage, kill the parents first, and then the kids, and then leave.
Stop it. Get some help.
This notebook was actually the focus of many meetings between Brian Jr.'s parents and the school, and each time the school tried to warn the Cohees of some alarming, disturbing behavior, his parents would say that he was being treated unfairly, or some other excuse to like dismiss or justify their discovery. In fact, Brian's mom, in a very Karen fashion, had like a binder full of complaints that she had lobbied against the school, on Brian's behalf. Much later, after learning about Brian murdering and dismembering Walter Barnes, these same educators were asked if they were surprised, and each of them said no. They really did try to warn his parents. 2 years earlier, a 17-year-old Brian encountered a stray cat hanging around his dad's house. He lured it into a sleeping bag, beat it, strangled it, and then decapitated it. He kept the head in a wine cork box for 3 days and then eventually disposed of it. A year later, his parents discovered a kill kit. What's a kill kit, you might ask? Well, this kit included a hammer, knife, large zip ties, duct tape, rope, a saw, everything you might need. Well, when his parents found this kit, they threatened to turn it into the police until Brian got rid of it, which he did, except he kept the knife. Guess that's all you need. Brian's childhood friend, Kylan, who I mentioned earlier, would later say that Brian had a very morbid sense of humor, but she was never afraid of him. Remember, Brian's the type of guy who really enjoyed reading about serial killers and school shooters, and while nobody was shocked at what Brian actually did, they were surprised that he only did it to one person. When the case went to trial, Brian Cohee attempted to plead guilty by reason of insanity, which is actually very difficult to do. During testimony, evidence was presented that claimed that Brian had been psychologically evaluated after that masking tape whip incident from 2019. Brian had also been diagnosed with ADHD and was on the autism spectrum. He was also referred for further evaluation, but Terry said she couldn't find anybody to take the referral in their town, so she just never continued. So the jury deliberated for 2 days, and they found the now 21-year-old Brian Cohee guilty. 1 count of premeditated murder, 1 count of evidence tampering, and 2 counts of tampering with a deceased body. Brian Cohee's alleged mental illnesses were not considered a mitigating factor in the crime, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the Buena Vista Correctional Institute. The city of Grand Junction actually created a memorial for Walter Barnes, the man who was kind to everyone he met, who was always reading books, and would even share the bread from his sandwiches with the birds that would gather at his feet. A local artist fashioned a metal sculpture of a tree and some of Walter's favorite books. And that is the story of Brian Cohee Jr. Gross, gruesome, and what's even scarier is just doing it for the fun of it. Anyways, again, if you want to know any of the makeup that I used in today's look down in the description box because everything is linked. If you have a Crue Trime story that you want to recommend to me, also down in the description box is a link to a Google document where you can fill in all the dirty details. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Hair's all stuck to my face. What? Fuck. 500. Shit.
Hi, Murray. Can I have a kissy? Murray.
Thank you. Created a more. Hi, Murray. My feet are asleep. Well, they were asleep, so I just uncrossed my legs, and now they're like pins and needles. Oh god, it's the worst. Pins and needles, pins and needles, pins and needles. Ugh.